I am a calculator collector. I actually daily carry an HP 28C because it's awesome. But I don't like to collect just any calculator. Early calculators were far more varied than their modern counterparts and had wildly different designs and display types that make them interesting to see the differences between. But sometime around the mid-80s, calculators started to become all the same without a lot of differences between them, and that just makes them really boring. Now, there are, of course, exceptions to these rules in unique cases, like the highly programmable HP-12C, or Casio's line of color graphing calculators. But I really don't want to get into adding machines. Well, I guess that Casio 121L with its very pretty VFD tubes is, and so is that interesting Unisonic one with the clock built in, and then of course, the mechanical Bond Context 10, how could I pass that up? Well, I guess if I've made exceptions for those, I can probably find an exception for one of these. Now I want to set the stage of why this adding machine was worth breaking my rule. The history of Burroughs adding machines starts in the 1880s when William Burroughs designed and patented his first adding machine. This happened in an era when there was a boom of miniature mechanical marvels. In the same decade, we saw the release of the first personal camera from Kodak, the easily replaceable font typewriter from Hammond, and the first automobile from Benz. The concept of calculators had existed since the 1600s, but manufacturing limitations prevented them from becoming widespread. But the 1880s was in the heat of the Second Industrial Revolution, and rapid technological progress was being made. It was all but inevitable that someone would produce a mass-market calculator. And indeed, there were many who sought to do just that. Burroughs wasn't the first, but despite an unfortunately early passing of its founder, the Burroughs Corporation went on to be a dominant force in the adding machine market. They did this by buying competitors and through their own continuous internal development. This resulted in a strong portfolio of capable machines. These machines are usually designated by classes. The first was a Class 1, and the next major model was a Class 3, based off of a Pike adding machine. Both of these featured a visible counter or register that displayed the number you were currently working with. They were also usually capable of printing numbers onto paper, with varying sizes of platens being available. The next major release was a dedicated calculator heavily based off of the Comptometer, a company they did not buy out. While not named such, their device was commonly referred to as a comptometer due to the established market of its competitor. This led Comptometer to market its trademark name to prevent it from becoming genericized, a problem Google faces to this day. Finally, we get to the model I have here. Originally patented in 1926, this model would be released as the Class 8, 9, and 10. 8s were capable of adding only. 9s featured dedicated subtracting, and 10s are less common and directed at financial use. These machines were called the portable, despite weighing in at 21 pounds in the case of mine. Burroughs were also forward-thinking in designing these machines and planned to add an electric motor to eliminate the need for the crank. This would later be added as an option when choosing your machine. The portable was designed modularly to simplify production while offering a wider choice of these features. The 6, 8, or 10 column keyboards, different widths of platens, true negatives, along with the subtraction and electric options, did not require significantly different base machines. The portable model was extremely popular, and the same basic design was kept in production until the 1960s. While the earlier, more elaborate machines may be the first and more desirable from a historic perspective, the portable would be far more identified with. Burroughs as a company continued designing, developing, and acquiring other companies and successfully made the transition to large-scale business computers. They were also involved in the release of the venerable Nixie tube. They were never a market leader in computers though, since IBM came on the scene and stole the show. Burroughs today has gone through a few mergers and acquisitions itself, and while technically does still exist as an ATM servicing company, it is mostly in name only. So with the history of the Burroughs Corporation, when I found a Burroughs adding machine, especially one of the more prominent models that they produced, I felt it was worth breaking my no adding machine rule. Let's start off by taking a look at the difference between adding machines and calculators, starting with an adding machine in its most basic form. This is a very simple device that you've probably seen before. It's a counter. You press this button, the number goes up by 1. You turn this knob, and you can clear the number. This is technically an adding machine though, and more specifically, it would be a key-driven adding machine with a 1 that you can use in the rightmost column. That is technically what this is. Adding machines work by maintaining a running total. All they want to do is maintain a total. That is the job of an adding machine. Usually they do this by adding to the total, but they can also do other operations on the total sometimes. But the most important thing you need to keep in mind is that they run a total. Calculators, on the other hand, are designed around the idea of working with two temporary numbers stored in registers. Registers are just storage locations in memory in the calculator that can be used to access numbers that you put in. Now, if I type in 1, we can see that the number has appeared here. This would be called a visible register. What happens when I press plus is the calculator copies the number from the visible register to a hidden register inside the calculator. I then will type 2, which is put into the visible register, overwriting the 1 that was previously there. When I press the equals sign, because I also pressed plus, it knows that I want to do an addition operation. It's going to add the two registers together and put the result in the visible register. Now, we can be sure of exactly what's going on here by pressing 1 plus and then equals. Because this has copied the number from the visible register to the hidden register, when I press equals, it adds the two numbers together because there was a 1 stored in the visible register. This is not that easy on an algebraic notation calculator to understand, which is why RPN calculators are a little easier to get to the grips of. Now, this is an HP12C, which I love, and I've done a video all about using this calculator. It's fantastic, but the idea around RPN is that it is much better suited for calculators because the workflow for RPN is much better suited towards stack operations on a processor. So let's take a look at that same thing again. If I push 1 here, I'm now displaying 1 in, I think, the X register. And when I press enter, I've copied it from the X register to the Y register. When I type 2, I now have 2 in the X register. Now, the 12C is a fairly advanced calculator and allows you to swap the contents of the registers. The X register here is a visible register, and the Y register is a hidden register inside the calculator. So this allows you to see the contents of both registers by swapping them. And like before, once I tell it what operation I want to do, it performs it. Now, I'm really not that good about following my own rules about not buying adding machines, so here's another one made by Signet, although I think this is actually a rebranded Unisonic, but that's not important right now. This one is a good example that will help me dispel a myth that people seem to have about adding machines, though, that they must have a printer. That isn't even related to the idea of working with a running total. Most adding machines would have a printer, though, because they would be used for working with financial calculations, and having a running record of what's going on with those is just a good idea. However, this adding machine is going to be useful for demonstrating how an adding machine works like a calculator with two registers, except it uses one of them as a permanent running total. So let's start out. I'm going to enter in 1, just like before, and this is now in the temporary working register. If I press the plus equals key, it is copied to the permanent total register. Now, this calculator displays the temporary register when you type in a temporary value, and then displays the total register when you press the plus equals key. Now, keeping in mind the idea of a plus equals operation is ideal when you're working with an adding machine because that's how it wants to work with a running total. Now, if I type in another number, say 9, it's going to switch to the temporary working register, and then when I press plus equals, it adds it to the total register and displays that. You can do operations like, say, divide by 2, and then run it, and that will modify the total register, and that's how you could use an adding machine to do other more advanced calculations. Now let's blur the lines between calculators and adding machines even more with this gorgeous Sony Sobox ICC 1600, which, hey, uses Burroughs released Nixie tubes. Now, this calculator has 3 registers, 2 temporary working registers, and 1 total register. But when you're using this just as a calculator, it doesn't ever use the total register. I can do 2 plus 1, and say them backwards, but it'll still add them correctly, and we can see the result is 3. When I press 1 plus 2 again, that is all that's displayed. But if I enable the total register, every time I press the equals key, the number that is the result is copied to the total register. If I do this again, we'll see that nothing has changed. But when I release the total key, it will display the total register's value. All right, now that you have a more fundamental understanding of how calculators and adding machines work with their registers, let's take a look at the Burroughs Portable. So this device has two registers. One of them, the temporary working register, is visible right in front of you. It is the numerical entry grid, which is how you type in the temporary working number. You can clear this by pressing error when you need to not enter your number into the total register, which is hidden inside the machine. Now, you can print the total register in one of two ways. You can either press the sum total key up here, which will print it but not clear it, or you can press the total key, which will print and clear the register. Now, this calculator does only use a printing mechanism for the output, so there is no visible register, which is unfortunate because it means you don't know what the total register is while you're working with this machine. This is something that some of the other options that were available at the time did actually have. Now, while I don't have a Burroughs Class 1 or a Class 3, I do have a Comptometer, which was one of the main competitors to the Burroughs machines of the day. Now, the Comptometer works a bit differently than the Burroughs, and its total register is visible with these digits down below. Anytime you add a number to it, you can always see what the new total is. This makes it a lot easier to work with because you don't have to try and keep in mind what the total might be or reprint it every time you want to see it. A fun little side note here. Back to the counter, this device and the Comptometer are very similar, and as long as I keep pressing the 1 key in the right column here, you can see how these are effectively equivalent. All right, now let's start to take a closer look at the Burroughs, starting with the input register or the numeric keypad. Now, these keypads came in different configurations, mostly with different columns. This is an 8-column model, but you could also get 6 and 10 columns. I am quite happy having an 8-column because I think I get a little too busy when there are 10 columns on here. Now, if you've ever seen one of these and been a bit confused and overwhelmed by how many buttons there are, this is actually a very simple device. Each one of these columns represents one digit in the input register. So if I want to display, say, 23, I could just hit 2 and 3. Except I wouldn't hit those keys. The colors also have meaning. These are decimal points, these are hundreds, and these are thousandths. So if I wanted to represent 23, I would actually type 23 here. Now, you are free to type anything you want wherever you want, but when you go to print out the results, it will put in decimal point punctuations that indicate the positions of the numbers. So if you want the paper to have the correct meaning, you do need to respect the different column values. While we're zoomed in here, you may have noticed that this is a ribbon-based printer and that mine is outfitted with black and red ink. This is not actually important. You can ignore the red side completely. The subtraction doesn't do anything with red. Someone who used this machine previously just put a red and black spool on here. Modern adding machines that do still exist can print in multiple colors and use ribbons. So it's very likely this is just a modern ribbon, and that was what they had available at the time when they needed to replace this. All right, now let's take a look at using the Burroughs adding machine. But because this is such a large working area versus such a tiny printing area, I'm going to go ahead and record the paper feed with my phone and superimpose this over here so you can see exactly what's happening up there because it is really difficult to see. Now, let's begin. So I've cleared my total by pressing down this key and pulling this. So I'm going to go ahead and feed this ahead and we can begin. So let's start off by doing what we've been doing before and doing 1 plus 2. So I'm going to first push down the 1 key in the first digit of the white column, and then I'm going to pull the crank, which will add it to the storage register, and it's going to print a 1 onto the paper to mark that a 1 was added to the total. Now, this is designed to use a paper to print out the history of everything that has happened to the total, but there is an option to do a non-add printing. So if I want to print just whatever I want, I can use this and it will print a number out, but it will not affect the total. So that's something to know. Okay, now let's go ahead and add 2 to the storage register. So I'm going to press 2 on the first column of the white area and then pull the crank. And we've now added 2. If I press a sum total and print it, we can see that we are now at 3. And the printout here has several different parts, but we'll take a look at that in just a little bit. So you can get an idea of how this works, and then when I want to print and clear the total finally, I press down the red total key, and you can see all of these hammers pop up and then clear down as the total register is cleared. Now let's take a look at these hammers and some really clever design decisions that went into this. So I'm going to go ahead and print all 9s as a non-add, and this will just raise up all of these hammers to their maximum positions. So these work by raising and lowering the hammers to get to the number that you need to print. The numbers are on the other side of the hammers, and then they are pulled back, although one of them is a little gummed up, and slammed against the paper. That is how it prints. That is very ingenious to have such a tiny printing mechanism compared to typewriters of the day. I just love that. It's so compact. Now, we can also see that it printed, as I'd mentioned earlier, a comma and a decimal point. This is very faint, I know, but they are there. Now, if I press the 9 and 9 in the second and 6th columns and pull those up, we can see these hammers are just a little bit wider than the other hammers, and that's because on the other side, these hammers have commas and decimal points respectively alongside every single digit they print. This is what allows it to print those digits or those punctuation marks when you are printing the digits. Very, very clever. And here's what the other side of those hammers looks like. Now, as far as I know, that one slightly sticking hammer is the only issue that my unit has, which is very impressive considering its age. One interesting note about these is that using the serial number engraved on the front of them, you can date when they were produced if you can find some guides on what the serial numbers were in certain years. Based on what I've been able to find online, my exact unit here would have been produced in 1941. So this is a nearly 80-year-old adding machine. That is just crazy impressive. It works fantastically for its age. I love old stuff like this. Now, speaking of its age, I need to address its condition on the exterior. It's actually pretty darn dirty, and I'm not really sure how I want to address that. On the one hand, I like my stuff being nice and presentable, but on the other hand, this is almost old enough to the point where this would be considered patina, and it's a little more complicated than just, say, cleaning a piece of brass, because inside, there are a lot of moving parts that need to have grease on them, and if I just spritz this with water and try and wipe it off, it's going to drip down inside and possibly damage the mechanisms over time. So I need to be very careful. Now, I do have some ideas. I have this thick piece of yarn or whatever this is, and I can thread this in between the keys, and actually that's doing quite a lot. I hadn't really tried this yet, but that is a significant improvement. Oh yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and finish this. Okay, yeah, you know what? I think I will try and clean this dry, because that was a huge improvement. And if I can continue that, then this thing could look pretty darn spiffy. So I'm just going to do this for a while now. All right, yep, that made a huge improvement. Great, now I actually want to go on a little bit of a cleaning kick with this. So let me show you how you take this apart a bit. So first thing I'm going to do here is tear the paper. And let that go behind my desk. And now we're going to remove the whole platen area. Now, this is only held in with 2 screws, but you do have to remove these 2 to get to those 2 screws. So let me do this really quick here, and we'll get in. So first off, you have your paper release lever. Once you have that done, pulled back, you can re-spool your paper. The paper is held on with this piece, which frequently gets lost. There are people who've replaced this by just bending a paper clip into a shape where it jams down into some little slots in the back down in there and then hooks onto this. So it's really not that important if you're missing this piece, but it is something to be aware of. With those out of the way, we can see that this is disgusting, but we can get to this screw here, which goes down and in, and then we have to get to the other one, which is underneath of this panel. And of course, because this thing was designed in the 20s, it's all flatheads. And with this out of the way, which is fairly tight up against that ribbon guide, unfortunately, so you're likely going to scratch that paint. There's really not any room to stick anything else in there. We can actually see the other screw down in here. And from here, I'm going to make a bit of a recommendation. So you see this part right here. As you pull this forward, that part moves back. I'm going to recommend moving the crank most of the way forward, because this will position this so it lifts straight up and off. And then it is very easy to get to everything underneath. And that's all there is to remove the platen. Now, I mentioned that you could get different length platens to put on this, and that's because you could fit a full-size sheet of typewriter paper into the platen and move it back and forth to type onto columns. That's something we'll look at later in this video, but if you ever have one of these and you want to replace the platen with a larger one, that's how easy it is. There's almost nothing on here that interfaces with the calculator itself. It's just the line advance on the bottom that will move the paper to the next line and position. That's this, actually. No, here it is. This is, it's somewhere in there. But anyway, it will move the ribbon and it will position the paper to the next line. So we can put that aside, and now we can get to this. And there are two more screws on the front, and the crank is actually really easy to remove. You just pull it off. And I guess let's just go all in on this. Oh, wait, there's one more thing I'll have to remove. The subtractor key. Now, on some models of this, the subtraction would actually be a lever positioned down here, and I do have a picture of one of those. So you might have a lever down there, and then you don't have to worry about taking this off, but if you do have a key for it, then you'll need to undo a screw here, and then you should be able to just slide that off. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and I'll mention this probably again when I put this back together, is that the first time I took this apart, I actually had to reposition the back of the case because the subtractor key was rubbing up against the case. But after that's done, I should just be able to lift this up. And there are the guts. All right, now here's part of why I don't want to attempt to remove the keypad to clean this, even though it's really, really dirty in here. We can see that we have this piece that's screwed to the keypad, but to get to those screws, I would either need some kind of super short screwdriver or to take this off of the bottom plate. But that doesn't even begin to address the issues, because this piece runs onto this bar, which goes through the solid metal plates that make up the core of this thing. And I'm gonna go out on a limb here and guess that every single one of these pieces is one of those, and they go all the way through the keypad. So I would have to get my way through the main core of the machine to get to that. So totally disassembling this to get the keypad off just to clean it is not that appealing. So I'm probably not going to do that. It's just too much work, and it's too likely to damage it because there are so many little things going on in here. Like, take a look at this. When I press down one of the keys, you see it moves this spring. Now, that spring, if it broke, I'm pretty sure this just wouldn't work anymore for that column. So there's probably a lot of little parts like that in there that I just need to make sure don't get damaged. And if I go ripping this thing apart without really knowing what I'm doing, I'm likely to do that. So I'm not going to do that right now. But this is very dirty, so I am going to try and brush out as much of all of this as I can. Let me start off by taking off this seal thing that goes between the two parts of the chassis so I can get to even more, and then I'll begin. This stuff is mostly going to be a combination of oil and dust, so while it looks really gross, it's not that bad. This thing has just been around for a long time. That's all. You know, this area I can use a solvent on. Let me go get something for that. That was easier than any typewriter I've ever cleaned because the keys are, well, glyphs are all right here, but it was also more difficult because I could see every single thing that was wrong with them. So, yeah, but I think that's going to print a lot cleaner now. I decided to experiment a little bit with wet cleaning with a paper towel wrapped around it, so hopefully no fluid gets underneath. And while possible, it's really not feasible because of how much effort it's going to take. There are 72 number keys on here. That's too many. Although I feel like that was fairly successful overall, so I think I'm going to get a little risky here and slightly dampen a towel. That's it. And try and just rub the tops of the keys. Let's see what that does. Alright, I can make the white keys look pretty good because the crud built up in the numbers isn't going to impact them too much, but it would make the black keys look kind of weird, but I think it's worth it. I'm going to go ahead and just do it. Get it done. Okay, I kind of just ended up going for it. So it turned out this stuff was really good for interleaving in between here to make a, well, not quite watertight seal, but it would at least catch everything. So I was able to really well clean that keyboard, actually, without having to disable it or disassemble it. I am very, very happy with that result. So that's cool. I can't really get under these. To fully clean this piece, you would seriously have to remove all of the keys, and they're threaded through the metal plate in the back, and it's just, no, I don't, no. That's not happening. So, I think that's a pretty good compromise. I'm probably going to go ahead and try and clean this ring off around the edge of it, because it is possible. But, yeah, that worked really, really well. Alright, now when it comes to cleaning the case, I mean, some parts of this are pretty obviously going to be easy. You can just wipe all this down off of here and then that's gone. But I did read that these indented areas on the sides of it have a coating in here to make it a satin finish, and that it can be soluble with, well, even just water. So I'm a little concerned about trying to clean that. So on the back, because my back's pretty messed up already on this, let me try a little bit of my knockoff Windex and see what happens. Yeah, I don't think I'm really wearing through it. If I am, it's very minor. Let me try now on Well, the front could really use something because this is adhesive from something. I'm not really sure what. So let me try that. So it's cracked like a dry lake bed type thing, and I think I may have made it crack a lot more. I can see in the corners here it is disappearing. Okay, so it does, care does need to be taken. That's really frustrating. A lot of the surfaces of this thing have that stuff on it, so it's gonna make it really hard to clean. Alright, I cleaned this up a bit. I took it out and cleaned it because it's too much for fluid in here. So I just did it somewhere else, and I think I'm gonna go take this outside and use an air compressor on it because it just has so much dust all around in it. That's just, yeah, that needs to be dry cleaned first for sure. All right, I'm gonna go with that. It's not perfectly clean, but the objective here isn't to perfectly restore this. I'm not going to go through all of that trouble. It would take way too much effort, and then honestly, part of the thing that makes this cool is it's so old and it has history, so I don't really want to clean all of that off of it. I'm sure if I really wanted to, I could probably find a better specimen, but I don't need that, so I'm just going to leave it as is. And go ahead and get it put back together here. Well, that was a lot more in-depth for the cleaning than I really intended on doing, but hey, it looks so much better now, and I think it's time we actually get back to taking a look at what this thing can do. So let's move on to using subtraction on this. Now I have it easy on my Burroughs because mine is a class 9 with a subtractor. If you have a class 8 that does not have a subtractor built in, there is a way that you can still do subtraction, and I will talk about how you go about that. But first, let's cover doing it with subtraction. So I'm going to punch in 10 first. Now I've already cleared the total, and to do 10, I just need to push this 1. You'll notice there is no 0 key down here, and that's because it assumes that if you're printing this far over but don't have any keys over here, it must all be zeros. So you don't need to worry about that. So I will go ahead and add my 10. Now I'm going to subtract 5. So I'm going to go over to 5 here, hit the subtractor, which is going to lock in, and then pull the crank. 5 will be subtracted, and this hammer rose up and printed a subtractor. That way you know that it is a subtraction operation as opposed to an addition operation. And if we print the sum total here, we will see we have 5. Now, here's one thing to note about these. There is an option for the Burroughs machines to have a true negative. Now, I talked about this in my Bond Context 10 video, but most mechanical calculators like this will underflow their registers if you try to go below 0. So if I say subtract 6, the number that's going to be in the register is going to be all 9s because it doesn't know how to represent negative values. This is a downside of mechanical calculators, but some of these apparently can have true negatives as a feature. I don't know exactly how that works, but it would be cool to see that. So I'm probably going to be on the lookout to see if I can find one of those. But for now, that's pretty much it for subtraction. But how do you do subtraction if you don't have a subtractor built in? Now, in order to show you how to do subtraction without subtraction, I'm going to use the Comptometer because it's designed for this. Now, the Comptometer is a whole other type of calculator, and I don't really want to get into how it works right now, but just keep in mind that when you press a key, it's immediately added to the register, and pulling the crank resets it, not adds it. So let's begin. I'm going to do 10 minus 5. So I'm going to punch in 10, which is as it is on the Burroughs, but now for subtraction, it gets a little different. Now you may have noticed that the Comptometer has more numbers printed on the keys. You have the typical numbers that you use when you're adding, but it also has these other smaller numbers. These numbers are the nines complement. You would use these numbers to trick yourself into doing subtraction using addition. So the idea of a nines complement is that you're going to add a number to the point where it would be equivalent to having done a subtraction. Now, this is done by having 0 through 8 labeled on the keys, and if you need to subtract 9, you just don't do anything. So that's how this is laid out. So let's say I want to subtract 5. Now, there is one other problem here. So usually you would think you would go down to just the 5 in the small numbers and hit that, but you're actually going to be adding 4, which would mean that the result would be 14. Because of a quirk of nines complement, you need to add 1 to the rightmost digit when you're doing a subtraction. So we're actually going to subtract 4, but really we're adding 5. Then when we do this, we can see we're at 15. And if we'd done a subtraction, this 1 would have gone away. Now there is one trick that we can do to make this work. If we go back to 10, we can borrow a 0. So we can see that the leading number here is a 0, and do the 4 again, and we will have this. But we're still not out of the woods yet because we added a 1 there. Well, one feature of the Comptometer is that it has these levers down here that allow you to prevent a carryover. So if we borrow a 0 again and do the subtraction, this will work out and give us the result we want. Now, this can be applied to more complex numbers as well. Let's say we have 88 and we want to subtract 25. The answer would be 63. So let's go ahead and try this. We're going to punch in 2, and that's up here, and 5, but we need to do 4 instead because as the leftmost number, we're going to prevent a carryover, do our subtraction, and we get 63. Now that we know how this works, and we know how the nines complement numbers are arranged on the keys, starting at 0, going down to 8, we can take this concept over to the Burroughs. All right, so let's go ahead and do subtraction on this calculator. So we're going to do 10 minus 5 first. So I've already cleared the total, and I'm going to go ahead and add 10 to the hidden total register. Now, this is where this starts to become annoying, that you can't see the total register, is because now I don't know what's in it, and I don't know how to do the carryovers. So you can only do subtractions if you really know what's in the total register, unfortunately. But since I'm doing a very simple calculation here, and I do know what's in it, I can accommodate for this. So I'm going to do 10 minus 5 again. I know 10 is in the register, so I know if I put 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but then go up 1 in, I will end up with the correct answer, but I also know that there is a 1 in this column. Now, I can borrow a 0 here, but I'm not going to prevent the carryover because there are no carryover prevention switches. You can, however, work around this by just placing 9s in all of the columns going over. This will continue the carryover completely away. So if we go ahead and do this, and then print the results, we can see we get 5. Now let's go ahead and do the more complicated 88 minus 25. So I've cleared the register. Let's punch in 88. All right. We're going to minus 25. So 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Go up 1. And then we're going to clear over with the 9s. Print the total, and it should be 63. And it is. And that's how you can do subtraction without a subtractor on an adding machine. So those are the basics of doing addition and subtraction on an adding machine. But this is capable of multiplication and division as well, and even has a very handy feature for doing that. This is the repeat key. When you press it in and add a number to the total register, it doesn't clear the keyboard. Normally, when you put in a number and pull the crank, it releases all the keys in the keyboard, but the repeat key allows you to continue doing operations with the number in the temporary working register. This makes multiplication very quick. All right, let's do one of my favorite examples for multiplication, 12 times 12. So I'm going to start out by entering 12 here. I'm going to hold down the repeat key. Now, just like I initially demonstrated on the bond context 10, there's nothing stopping you from just pulling the lever 12 times. and then the result would be 12, or 144, 12 squared that is. But there's a much faster way of doing this that requires you to only pull the lever 3 times. So let's try this again. I'm going to punch in repeat, I'm going to put in 12, I'm going to pull the lever twice. Then I'm going to clear the keyboard and move over 1 column and pull the lever again. Then I will print the total, and we get 144. This is done by just moving over the multiplication like you would do it by hand. And this is so simple on a grid-driven adding machine that it's really powerful, actually, and makes things very easy to work out. So let's say we wanted to do a real-world example. I want to know how many hours there are in a year. So I'm going to do 365 times 24. So I'm going to enter 365 as the number of days in the year, and then we're going to multiply this by 24. So we're starting off in the first column, we're going to add 365 4 times. So let's go ahead and hold down the repeat key. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're going to clear. We're going to move this over, and we're going to do this 2 times. And now we can clear, print the total, and we have 8,760 hours in a year. This is a very quick and easy way to do multiplication. Next is division, and division on an adding machine can be a little tricky. So in order to show you how this works, I'm going to first run through it on my Bond Context 10. This is an adding machine with a division feature built in. Now I've already done a video that fully explains how this works, but in brief, this basically just hand holds you through the steps of doing division as you would on a normal adding machine. So let's start off by doing 144 divided by 12. Now, when you're doing division on an adding machine, you typically want to put the number as far over to the left in the register as possible, so you have as much working space as you can when you end up with a non-whole number result. In this case, we don't really need to worry about that because we know our answer is going to be 12. Okay, so let's start off with entering in the number because we need to clear this over to the left as well. Now, what we're going to do is subtract 12 from this number starting in the left and then moving our way over to the right. And we need to count how many times we can subtract it. This is just like doing division by hand, except the machine is going to do it for us. Now, the Bond Context 10 has a counter for the times that you actuate the plunger. The red number is for the times when you're doing subtraction, and division is a subtractive process. So I'm going to go ahead and press the plunger once. We can see this number went down by 12 and the counter went up by 1. We want the bottom number. I will press it again. The register underflowed, and this means that we went too far. This calculator knows that we went too far and will actually go back, and now the plunger is locked. This is letting us know that the answer for the first column is 1. Next, we will continue on, and it will begin the subtractive process on the next column. So we pressed it once, we pressed it twice, and now we know the answer for the next column is 2, and those are 1 and 2 for 12, which is the answer. But you'll notice that the end result in the register is 0. Now, let me walk you through how this worked. All right, now I'm going to do the same operation again, dividing 144 by 12, and I'm going to do it exactly how it will be done on the Burroughs calculator. So I'm going to enter in 12, and we're going to perform this operation on the left, doing subtraction. Now, the multiplication key on this calculator is pretty much exactly the same as the repeat key on the Burroughs, so just keep in mind that so it doesn't clear my entry over here. So what I need to do is think about when I subtract the number from these 2 digits, what it's going to be. And I know that I can do it once, but if I do it again, then it will be below 0, this whole register that is, and I will underflow the register. That's not good, and I can't do that. So I know I can only press this once, which means that my first digit is 1. After I've done that, I know I need to move on to working with the second set of numbers. And I can look at this and see, oh, I can do that twice. So I will press the plunger twice, and now it's all zeros. If I go below 0, I know I'm doing something wrong. So I have to try and keep it above 0, which is where the problem comes in on the Burroughs, because we can't see this register without printing out a number. Okay, now we're going to apply the same subtraction principles to the Burroughs like we did the Bond. But like the Bond, we actually get the results one digit at a time, and this is far more complicated, so we're going to have to write down what we get out of it as we do this. So let's go ahead and start off by clearing our total register and working with a clean spot. So we're going to do 144 divided by 12, just like before. Now, we do have to keep in mind that this decimal, or this comma here, is actually a decimal point, but that's not even the beginning of our issues. Okay, let's start off by taking a look at what we can do. So we need to start dividing this, and we're going to start off by subtracting 12 from the leftmost columns. We can see that we have 14, which means that we can only take 12 out once. So we're going to do this. We know that that's going to be a 1, so we're going to write down a 1. That will be the first digit of our answer. So let's go ahead and do our subtractive process, and there we go. Now, this is where this sucks because we can't see the register. So the only way to do this is to print a sum total. That won't clear it, remember. And we can see we have 24. Now, we definitely can't take 12 out of 2, so we know we have to move on to the next column. So we can look at this and we can see, that will go in 2 times. We'll write down a 2, and then we'll run through this. I will hold down repeat, 1, 2, and now we're done. We will print the sum total, and it didn't take it out. I subtracted. Oh, yeah. Okay, so this is a fun thing here. The repeat key doesn't repeat a subtraction, it ejects that. So you have to actually palm that every time. I forgot about that. So I'll take out 12 2 more times and palm that. Then I will print a sum total, and it will be 0. The joys of adding machine and adding machine quirks. Now, this was an easy subtraction. Let's go ahead and do a more difficult one. And to make sure we get the right answer, I'm going to do this first on my HP12C. So I want to know how many weeks there are in the year. And there are 365 days in the year, and there are 7 days in a week. And the answer should be 52.14. This is actually configured to round to 2 digits, but we'll go with that because as you're going to see, this is not going to be fun. But there are more digits. This kind of goes off forever. But that's our benchmark to hit. So 52.14. So let's go ahead and try this out. And because this is a non-whole integer result, we will have to pay attention to what the sum total is. So let's start off by entering 365. Print the sum total just to be sure. Okay, let's begin. So if we put 7 in this column, well, we can't because that's a 3. So we know the first number is 0. We're not going to get a number there. So we're going to move over. 7 into 36. That will work, but let's say I'm lazy and I don't want to do mental math. Well, I know 7 will go into 21 3 times, so let's go ahead and try that. Actually, 7 will go into 28 4 times, so we'll do that. 7, repeat, 1, 2, 3, 4. And let's see what the sum total is now. It is 8, so we can actually do it one more time. 7 minus. Okay, so I just did that in the wrong column. Cool, so I'm going to have to add 7 there now to undo that. Let's print the sum total. Okay, 8, subtract 7 from there. Bingo, print the sum total. And we can see we have 15. Okay, so we did this, 5 times? That sounds about right. Okay, now let's move on. So we can do 7 into this column now. And we can see 15, 7 times 2 is 14, so we know we're going to do it twice. 1, 2. All right, so we can do that. And we also know that our decimal point is there now. So let's go ahead and print our sum total. And we have a 1 and a 0, so we're going to continue this on. We can't subtract 7 out of 1, so we're going to move over and subtract 7 out of 10. And we can do this a total of 1 times. So we'll do this once, and now we need to print our results. We can see a 3. We can't subtract 7 out of 3, so we have to go over. And now we can see that we have to do, say, 28 again, because 7 times 4. Actually, that's the wrong area. We have to move over one more, repeat, repeat, and subtract. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go ahead and print the total again to see where we're at. And yep, we can't take 7 out of 2, so there we go. And this would just continue on and on until we fill out this number. But we'll go ahead and stop there. And you can just see how this process would continue. You would take your number out, do your division, and just keep going. And just look at how much paper this prints. I mean, if I pull this up, tear this off. So we started out with 365 here. This is all just to divide 365 by 7. This process is very slow and terrible, but it is doable. So we've done addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division all on an adding machine from 1926. That is really cool. I enjoy using these old devices and seeing what they're capable of. I really like seeing how we've got to where we are, and this is so raw. It really does illustrate some of the fundamental concepts of how these things work. But there are a few more things that we could still check out on this, and one of them would be, say, the ribbons. Now, I mentioned that this can't print in red, and that's not entirely true. What I meant is that it has no capability of lifting the ribbons up. Now, a true two-color adding machine would move the ribbon up to print in a different color, but this can't do that unless you force it to. So if I want to say print 3, it's in black, but if I pull this up and then print, I can get it to print in red, but it's not really designed to do that. Now, I could also flip the spools over and do that, but that's a lot of work to set up. Now, I wouldn't have to remove these. I just wanted to do that to illustrate the point of red. So that's, really a kind of useful feature to have on there. It's just not designed for that. I don't know if there were any Platens available for this that would support a split color feature like that, but it's totally possible. I'm not sure. But another thing about the Platen is that I mentioned that there were wider ones. Now, this one is the narrower Platen that I believe was more common, and you could believe that this one was meant for receipt usage, and we can kind of demonstrate that. But the wider Platen would have been to accept a full-size sheet of paper. The option to use a full-size sheet of paper would, of course, been used with a typewriter. Now, this is a Royal typewriter from about the same time period as my Burroughs adding machine here, so this is a combination that could have actually existed. Now, the reason you would want a full-size Platen on here is to be able to type up a document on here and then pull the sheet out and bring it over to the adding machine if you need to include calculations on it. Now, since mine has the narrower Platen, I'm not really able to do that. But one thing I can do is demonstrate how you might do the addition of a receipt on here and then add labels to what was purchased over here. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, let's start to build up our receipt. So we're going to go ahead and just leave a little bit of working space at the top where you could say print the store's name. And let's start adding up an imaginary customer who came to the counter. So let's say they bought a packet of seeds. Maybe that is 50 cents. And let's say they want to order a couple of bags of stock feed. So maybe those are like $4 each and they bought 5 bags. All right. And then maybe they're going to buy a new shovel, and that is maybe $6. So we can see how we just continue to add everything up, and then when we get to the end, we're going to do our final total. And just for fun, let's go ahead and pull this ribbon up to do this, and print that, and we have it in red. I really don't think you're supposed to do that, but it is kind of fun. So now we have our receipt, and let's go ahead and pull this off and put it on our typewriter. Go ahead and give us a little more working space. Now, when you're working with a typewriter, there are a couple of things you need to keep in mind. The paper alignment, you'll want to have set to 0 most likely, and then you need to have margins set. So I'm going to go ahead and bring these in to about what I would want to use the receipt with. Actually, that won't go any farther over, so I'm going to bring this over here and then align this. over a bit more, and I think that'll be good. So let's go ahead and feed our paper in. Now, this isn't going to feed in particularly well because it's kind of short, but this will work out. So, all right, now when we go over, we are still within the bounds of the paper, so we know we're going to stay on, and when we tab over, it will stop. Well, it should have stopped. The margin didn't exactly... Oh, I have the margin cleared. Duh. Let's bring the margin over, and we don't really want to go over our numbers, so let's set our margin there. Now, there is our page end. There is our right margin. We can't go any farther, and let's continue on. So let's start off by making sure we have lines aligned here, and we will want to do that by bringing this over and aligning to our numbers. So I'm going to unlock the Platen, readjust that, and now that should strike about where our numbers are. So the first thing we had were corn seeds. So let's go ahead and bring this over, and we'll say put, I am locked, and this typewriter isn't doing particularly great. I need to do a little bit of a cleaning on this and try and get this working. There we go. Alrighty, and now we can see that's sort of aligned. It's not tremendous, so I'm going to release that and bring this down a little bit for the next line. But then we can continue on. How about there? It's not aligning well. Anyway, let's move on to the bags. What was that? That was animal feed. All right, bring this down one. So let's say feed stock. All right, that T didn't work tremendously well. There we go. And we can just put ditto marks for the rest of those. And there we are. And one more. What was that? A shovel. And then let's go ahead and have some fun here and mark off our total. Perfect. And this we might want to go past the right margin. Oh no, you're supposed to release. What? Maybe I should just move it over. Oh, yeah, this one not working tremendously well. And we'll go over, come back, and do our total. And there we are. We have our printed receipt. Well, I think that's about everything I can talk about for my Burroughs Class 9 adding machine. I really didn't plan on ever getting one of these, but you know what? I'm glad I did. It's fun. I know I don't want to have a whole bunch of adding machines, but this one is unique enough. I definitely think that it is cool, and I'm glad I picked it up. I hope that you guys enjoyed seeing one of these being fully put through its paces and being demonstrated as much as I possibly can. If you want to see more stuff like this, well, I'm apparently going to talk about mechanical calculators a lot, so you might want to keep hanging around. If you want to support the channel, I am on Patreon, but for now, that's it. I'll see you next time.